It's time for another edition of Down the Rabbit Hole, where the staff of My Burbank Talks discusses topics from Burbank's past or dives deep into the history of the city. Now let's see what's on the agenda today as we join our show.
Hello, everybody. Craig Sherwood here with you once again, and along with, of course, Ross Benson. As they say, tally-ho, we're doing a show. Absolutely. We're back to our Down the Rabbit Hole series again, and that rabbit hole, we started that with our restaurants, and we've done 2 parts already. In fact, we have a 3rd part we're working on now, the ones we forgot, and there were quite a few, actually.
And that list continues to grow.
It continues to grow. So we will be back with that one. But today, we are going to talk about the history of the Warner Brothers lot. And so much, it's an iconic Burbank facility. So much has gone on here over the years. So many things that you probably do not know happened that we will touch on. And our guest today is Graham Hill. Graham, how you doing?
Pleasure to be here. Fine, thank you.
Well, we're glad to have you here. There's a lot we can talk about. Let's talk about you. I mean, listen, give us your background a little bit, and your how you studied the history of the studios and everything else, and tell us a little about yourself. Coming from England, the whole thing.
Well, in England, we got Warner Brothers television shows. The westerns that came over in the 1950s with Cheyenne and Maverick, they were on British television, and we only had 2 channels for the whole country. So, you would on the BBC, there was no commercials, and the ITV stations, they'd have small commercials. But back then, American shows were always popular. And Warner Brothers was distinct in the fact that it mentioned the studio at the start of its shows. Shows like Cheyenne, Maverick, Sugarfoot, 77, Sunset Strip. These were all hits, but they'd always start the show with, from the entertainment capital of the world, produced for television by Warner Brothers, with the logo right up front.
From the entertainment capital of the world, produced for television by Warner Brothers.
Being in England, did you understand always the terminology used in American stuff? And
yeah,
was there anything that was like, well, wait, I don't understand what they mean here, or because I don't think you really had westerns.
The American shows had the production value. They had big music scores.
Sure,
they utilized the studio system. They had the back lots. And they were exciting shows. They weren't dramatic acting like on the British television, but they were adventurous. And when you grow up in post-war Britain, it sounded exciting. It looked exciting.
Don't pick on British shows, though. I used to love the Thunderbirds when I was a kid.
Well, Jerry Anderson, that Lou Grade, who was associated with the ITV channels, he was the man that gave you The Saint, The Avenger.
Right. Oh, yeah. There a lot of good shows that came over here. So don't sell England short on that. So,
but when in the 50s, it wasn't that organized like that, see. And the American shows dominated, particularly.
You say it's just so weird how things have changed because Warner Brothers now has a division in England.
Well, they had a British base from the 1930s at Teddington Studios.
Oh, is that where it was?
Yeah, Warner Brothers, the British government would tax the American companies unless they poured money back into British productions. So they always had that. Plus, it was a conduit for British actors to come to Hollywood. MGM had a big studio in England.
And as we know it, I've been around 69 years, 68 years, and a lot has changed quite a bit.
Yeah.
From what it originally was. I mean, I grew up and I remember there were no fences. There were no walls, no ivy around everything. It was after 9/11.
Yeah,
they made that place look like a
Fortress.
Fortress, in fact,
Is it
on
particularly Warner Brothers?
Olive, across from what used to be Taco Bell, Producers 4, that is that big building at Hollywood Way and the entrance there, Gate 4, you could walk across the parking lot and go to Taco Bell, and then they put up the wall.
Right.
And at one time it was right like the ranch, what they call the ranch, Ivy. And the Greens guys, when they were slow on set,
Yeah.
they were out there cutting the ivy to make it look good. And now you look at this place, and a lot of people, I don't think, realize if you're not in the industry or if you haven't been on the lot, there's a lot goes on. It's a city within a city.
Yeah.
It has its own fire department. It has its own first aid station, its own security force, its own electrical plant. I mean, just all the things.
But that was a given for any studio. They all had that.
Right.
Universal had the best facility by having 400 acres to play with.
What brought you over here, across the pond to America? What was the motivation to have you?
Well, the British
move over to
in 1976, when I came to America, the British film industry was in total decline. You had you remember the Benny Hill television shows? The movie studios, Elstree, EMI, Borehamwood, they were producing softcore porn basically on major stages, and these were shown in the big theaters. There's only two chains, the Odeon chain, the Gorman Odeon, and then there's the ABC chain. But when I left, Elstree Studios, which were doing those kind of movies, Star Wars was being constructed at Elstree in 1976. And like I say, they came there because the talent was cheaper, the production costs were way cheaper. But the fact is, it was the American productions that really gave the shot in the arm to the British industry. And now Britain is building sound stages just like they are here. And it's not with movie companies, it's with, banker money. But Warner Brothers has its big studio there at Leavesden, which was an old Rolls-Royce factory that they converted. And they did the Harry Potter films there, and they're doing big productions and so on.
And that's what, when you say Harry Potter, I've attended a couple of things on the lot that they've talked about, and people don't realize, Harry Potter most of their production is done over there.
That's it. It's a lot cheaper. See, the British actors, there's a difference between dramatic actors, real actors, and movie stars. See, this is it. The British actor has saved many a film in American movies. It's like...
And it's funny, is a lot of times you don't know they're British actors.
Right.
You hear them in an interview, and all of a sudden the English accent...
They can adjust their accent.
Right, but it's funny how Americans aren't very good at
they can't do it the opposite way.
No,
that blew me away. I forget what show I was watching, and the guy has a regular, voice, American voice.
Yeah.
And then I saw him on Kelly or one of the talk shows, and he had he was talking with regular English accents, and how he does. I think it was 911. Was one of the firemen, and how he can do that, it kind of blew me away.
Because they try, like some countries produce athletes, they produce actors. They go to school, to college, and they can do the accents, any accent.
Kind of.
And they have a discipline. See, that the American actors don't have that discipline so much. See,
I guess I was just watching, again, a daytime talk show, and they were talking to the actor about that. It takes work to read a whole script and do it in character, but that's...
See, the British actors, when they come over, they get kind of corrupted by the big money and the star treatment. See, they're used to doing plays and coming out of stock small companies.
They all do Shakespeare there.
See, and then they come out here, and there's no going back. They've seen They've seen how good it is.
Well, they get spoiled.
This is it. It's like Richard Harris when he came over,
They taste the lifestyle, and
That's right.
it doesn't rain here that much.
So you take an actor like Rex Harrison. Rex Harrison came over, one of the first wave of British actors, and he comes to America, and then they ask him to do some dubbing. The sound wasn't recorded right on location, and so that would be extra. That would be after his normal salary. So he would come in at Fox, and he would start a session to dub, and then he'd start coughing. And then that's it. That's a wrap. We can't use you today, but he gets paid for the day. And then they go through the same thing. This was happening on Cleopatra. You see, that it was already overboard with production costs, and so he cashed in on that.
I mean, as you say, now with voiceover and with the I remember when I worked at Warner Brothers, like the ADR building in stages.
Yeah.
I mean, for full productions, they would have a full orchestra. And you walk in when they're in the middle of doing a score, and you go, and they don't do it in order. That's what's kind of funny is they'll do pieces, and then it's
all bits and pieces. It depends how the editing's going. Back in the classic era of Warner Brothers, you'd have them do the Max Steiner big movies. The orchestra comes in, and at the end of the day, they do the animation music, the same orchestra.
Yeah,
but they all were well trained, that they worked as an assembly line, and it's.
Well, let's get back to Warner Brothers a little bit here, because I think we are straying. We could probably stray like this all day long. But it's just
so we stray on
that rabbit hole. That took a left turn.
That's it.
At Albuquerque.
We let's talk about a little the early history of Warner Brothers and how it formed, how the brothers came to being and everything else, and what's your recollection about that?
Well, when you talk of Warner Brothers, the four Warner Brothers it was five actually, but one of them didn't want to become a studio guy, but Harry, no senior member of the family, the oldest. There was a 15-year gap between him and the youngest, Jack Warner, and they were basically the Warner Brothers. They were complete opposites. Harry ran New York and the financing, and Jack was doing the production. But the studio, was indifferent. They got into the theater business first, and they lucked out with the jazz singer. But Sam Warner, who died just before the premiere of the picture, he was the one that got him into sound with Vitaphone. Vitaphone wasn't the adopted. It was a clumsy, you had to play a separate disc with the projector. So that wasn't going to work. And Fox had Movietone, which was sound on film, so they dominated. But anyway, Albert Warner was the accountant of the family. He was like a mediator between Jack and Harry. And like I say, the temperaments were complete opposites.
Well, I had heard that. When I worked there, Jack was still around and not here at the lot, but they had a contentious relationship.
It was a movie in itself. The two brothers. You talk about Betty Davis and Joan Crawford. That was nothing compared to.
Where did they get their financing from their father, or?
Well, they got financing from the banks. They had a banker called Motley Flint. And I believe he died in England during World War II, supervising the British studio. But they would be on the verge of bankruptcy throughout the 1930s. But Harry was good at putting on a good show. They set up, when they came out to the West Coast, they set up on Sunset Boulevard in Bronson. And the studio was very crude looking. But to impress the bankers, they designed a facade on the front of the stages, like a colonnade building that looked very impressive. And that's where they bring all the very thin building, by the way, basically a facade.
Well, I don't want to ruin anybody's dreams of when you're watching a show or a movie, but now it's digital. But I mean, years ago, you could take that facade, and we witnessed it when we saw the billboards that are out here that are, people come out here from back east and they stand along Olive Avenue with these huge billboards, that they promote the different shows on. In the studio business, don't blink, because it could be a different front of a stage, and 5 minutes later, it could be a street scene. I mean,
well, those billboards that you saw were hand painted in the 70s, and that years ago they didn't have any billboards on the side of the studio. It just said home of Warner Brothers.
We used to watch them paint them all the time.
They painted those things in the heat of the day, and they draw it out in pencil.
Well, in fact, you are correct, because years ago when I was a firefighter there, those were done in the craft building.
Yeah.
And they would they're huge. I mean, we're talking.
Right.
And there was a slit in the floor, and they would, your dad used to do that on the garage door here, take graphite and, over the design,
right,
and then he would paint it in, and that's the same thing.
They use a projector, and then,
and that's what they did. It's a lot.
Well, those paintings were so good you thought they were photographs. They were. Now they use photographs. They don't do it hand painting. But like I say, when you had Scarecrow and Mrs. King, and you had the Dukes of Hazzard painted on the sides of the walls.
Well, it's funny. We went to school with a guy by the name of Mitch Haddad, who was a studio photographer, and the 2.5 Men and one of the other shows, he was the photographer, and it was on the billboard out here for years. And I always drove by and go, wow, good old Mitch, that's his artwork. And he remembers shooting it. He was the, like I said, the photographer on 2.5 Men. Great show, he said, to work on. But when he composed the picture, it was different. And it was on outside of, the stage here for years.
Well, you got to remember, Burbank Council must have okayed it, because they had a billboard ordinance, didn't they?
Still do.
They still do. And in fact, Warner Brothers was the first. And it's funny, a lot of people don't remember, this is a rabbit hole, but there was what was called Building 119. The Triangle Building was across from Copper Penny.
Mm-hmm. And
that Triangle Building, it had its own building number. And on the side coming in from Hollywood, Malpaso Productions,
Clint Eastwood would be up there.
And that was part of his contract with Warner Brothers.
Yeah.
His show comes out, he gets
to see it every day.
Yep.
See?
And Malpaso Productions, right outside Stage 5, they would walk out, and there's their show always being. But then they tore that down, and then they made it a triangle, but I remember cars being launched out of there. What show was that? There was some show that they had, they did all sorts of crazy things.
Well, years ago, I think early 50s, 52, there's a Doris Day picture called It's a Great Feeling. And in that, they show that triangle, and they show the Warner Brothers lot. They show the people. It's an insider joke. You see all these cameos, Ronald Reagan, Joan Crawford, imitating Mildred Pierce, Edward G. Robinson, because they were all under their 7-year contract, so it was just another job for them. If you watch that movie, it's out on DVD.
Well, I find that very interesting.
It's like a time capsule. It shows you the lot driving through Gate 2.
Well, some of the shows you watch today, the Circle Drive, which was in front of the Warner Brothers building, they use that in a ton of shows. But Gate 2, what used to be Gate 2, what was that? That's Olive and Franklin, I believe, it was the original street. That really hasn't changed much.
Let's talk about Gate 2 then. It's had a lot of iconic scenes there, and it's had some unfortunate incidents back in the 40s.
That's right.
Talk about the strike back in the 40s.
The strike in 1945, October 45, because during the war, strikes were forbidden in the country. But it was basically the IATSC had a stranglehold on the movie industry. They controlled all the unions, and mobsters controlled where the theaters were located. So if the studios didn't pay some blackmail money to them, they could put a stink bomb into a theater and clear it out and ruin business. And the mobsters were also deducting money from the unions. The union members were unaware of it, but if they wanted to work back then, getting a job in the union was like a godsend. It was.
Well, it's funny you say that, and if you look back at the history, when Warner Brothers has a bad year, I don't know how they have a big fire.
Well, that's down. We got that down the line here.
Oh, I didn't even see that,
but it's like I say, the unions. A good union was trying to be formed, and Herb Sorrell was the head of it. He was branded a communist because he had a socialist background. But the studios back then, they didn't want another union coming forth. They'd already organized the set painters, and they organized the Disney animators. And so,
and I know the strike of 40, what was it?
45.
45.
That was the most violent.
And we have a picture, I believe we're going to, put in, insert in here. They brought in longshoremen. They weren't fooling around.
No, they brought in agitators. They brought in the heavy muscle, the teamsters.
You told me privately before, they had machine guns.
They had machine gun. The studio put machine gun posts to intimidate people. And then they turned the fire hoses on the people. People got injured.
And what gets me is that entrance, gate 2, where the employees walk in or you drive in.
Same in, yeah.
It has never changed from many years ago.
It's the same as Blazing Saddles when you saw it running out the gate there.
And again, I know we're down the rabbit hole, but people, some people in Burbank probably drive past that 3 times a day, 4 times a day, maybe going to over the hill, as we call it. But that studio, that gate is...
It hasn't changed. In fact, like I say, there's documentaries people can see online of them building the stages and that. Remember, Warner Brothers Studio was basically the First National studio. First National was an organized theater circuit, but they went bankrupt. And they built their studio like 6 stages in 1926. And then by late 28, Warner Brothers, fresh from its money from the jazz singer, they bought the property, and then they expanded it. But they had, there was a lot of land around that lot back then.
A quick flashback when we're talking about these huge billboards. I remember when Disney wanted to do the same billboards, and the Rancho people didn't want the billboards put up because they didn't want the added cars driving by and looking at the billboard. Now, their stages over at Disney are set back quite a bit compared to here. But it's kind of funny because Burbank didn't have an ordinance, and I remember a city councilman, I drove by it coming here today, Nickelodeon, had SpongeBob lurched over a building. And
right.
I remember the councilman brought up at city council meeting, whose dumb idea is that? I mean, why are we allowing that? Not realizing we're the media capital of the world. Every studio is here.
You bring up a point, but it doesn't bring a lot of money into Burbank. That's the Costco.
That's true. I mean, it does not. The studios themselves do not.
Right.
But it's all the ancillary. It's the prop houses. It's the editing.
That's right. But the caterers. But it doesn't need to advertise. It doesn't need to put up the billboards. People are driving to work. They didn't need it for 50 years.
They just do it for tourism.
Yeah, it's for tourism.
And that's it. And now, what they have found is Warner Brothers is what they call a rental studio.
They all are, yeah.
And that's why they're building the ranch how they are. They're going to have 58 total stages when the ranch 16 are done. The largest amount of stages under one company.
No.
And they won't even own them. They're the leasing agent for Jeff Worth. But that's how Warner Brothers is. If you work on a show, on a Warner show, you rent their lights. Their lighting company is not even on the lot. It's up
by the post office.
Exactly.
Yeah.
right behind the main post office. Most people don't know that.
Because the land's getting too valuable for stuff like that to be on the lot.
Well, I had a friend, that property building, most people don't know when you go past Gate 2, that large building on the left is the property building, and they got rid of all the employees, and they've now sold off all that property, and you can rent it from them at the crap house.
Yeah, you got to look at the movie industry and see that it's a very complex business. The studios never use their own money to finance. And no two pictures are financed the same way.
Well, to this day, they said the first Batman movie never made a profit, even though it made, it's hundreds of dollars.
It's like Universal saying to James Garner, your show Rockford Files never made a dime anywhere, but it was seen in 250 countries. And he took him to court.
And I told the writer of Batman, and they proved in court how it never made any money because they rented everything to themselves, and then they charged interest to themselves.
That's right.
And after a while, it was just...
That's what they call Hollywood accounting. See, this is it. It's about 3 sets of books.
Let's move on from Gate 2, which is iconic in itself, to probably the most iconic thing that's at Warner Brothers. By far, identify the Warner Brothers as the Warner Brothers Water Tower.
Right.
To tell us about the Water Tower, Warner Brothers.
Well, the water tower was like most factory plants. They all had water towers. And like I say, it was basically for fire control, getting the water. And the irony is that the Warner Brothers Water Tower never gave a drop of water to any fire.
Well, I was a fireman there, and it's called a water tower, but you're right, there's not water in it. When it started to rust and, every couple of years they would go in and fix it. We have seen, countless different logos that Warner Brothers has had. But like you said, that iconic, there's people that come up Hollywood Way and see that, Warner Brothers Water Tower, and it blows them away. I mean, right here in Burbank. And that's why they'll never take
It's the Hollywood sign for them. See, that's what it is. It's advertising. And unfortunately, the classic Warner Brothers shield, the yellow shield, was the best logo.
Right.
And the AT&T logo looked pretty bad when they redesigned the Warner Brothers Tower there. That looked very generic. But the Warner Brothers shield.
Well, what blows you away, people don't, again, if you're not in this industry, that business, when they go up there and paint that, I mean, there's guys up in cherry pickers. That water tower is, I forget the exact height. I was told what it was, and how many gallons of water that tower held at one time. Mm-hmm. Like I said, I was a fireman there. There is a hydrant right underneath the water tower, which you would actually hook to if there was a fire over in there, but you wouldn't get water from the water tower.
But people think the water tower is for dumping water on the sets for movies, but no, it never was. See, that's another irony of the studio. See, it's basically their flag that they're flying.
Right.
Well, and
they've kept it all these years because they know it's iconic.
Yeah. See, and it doesn't take up much space. So it's like, it's their flagpole.
But I do recall being out there for one of the openings of one of the Batman shows, and they made sure that water tower was in the background, how they set the shot up.
Well, they've decorated it for Supergirl and that, haven't they? Anything they're trying to plug at that moment, that's the thing. They line it up to do all sorts of things. They put the banner on it, and that it's, like I told you, it's unique. The other studios don't do it that way at all.
Well, Disney has a water tower with a Mickey Mouse on it, but
yeah, but that's
but let's look back again. That rabbit hole, the studio had back in the 70s and 80s. There were also homes of Columbia Pictures, Lorimar. Mm-hmm. They had the office buildings on the lot. They filmed most of the commercials at the ranch for used screen gens. Well, I remember.
You'll also remember that Irwin Allen, who'd been a 20th Century Fox guy, with production. He done the Poseidon Adventure. He did all those television shows, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. When he did the Towering Inferno, That's when Fox and Warner Brothers came together to make that picture. Fox supplied Paul Newman. They were going to do 2 separate fire skyscraper movies. And then they got the idea just to do one and collaborate. That was one of the first joint productions of 2 major studios.
Well, I'll tell you a secret. When I was a fireman there, back, if you're not on that lot's huge once you're on it. Back all the way to California Street is where Publicity used to be, their publicity building. And they used to keep the beehives.
They did the swarm.
For the swarm. And I remember they had a set watch that would sit and watch those bees back there. That building, the fire department was the security for that building. I walked into that building because you couldn't ride a bike out there. We had a fire truck or a pickup truck, and then we drove out there. I walked in that building. It was being burglarized. And I'm not sure where that's coming from, but
Sure, there you go.
I walked in that building, and there were 2 guys burglarizing it at the time, throwing typewriters over the fence. We were not armed. I remember having a radio on my side and a flashlight. And when I unsnapped my holster for my radio to call for help, they thought I had a gun, and they kept yelling, "Don't shoot, don't shoot." One of them hid off into the jungle, and the other one jumped the fence. And when the police got there, they found 24 typewriters out the fence. But I remember that literally having the life scared out of me walking into that building. And we checked it every night and every weekend. And I had checked it 1,000 times before. And to have 2 guys, you meet somebody in the, carrying out a typewriter. But a lot of different things went on over there.
Well, of course, we had crimes there, but let's go back and talk about the fires.
Yeah,
of course, what the water towers were originally designed for, it was never used. Well, the lot had fires.
Well, that's it. You've got to remember that those things were basically just wooden telegraph poles holding it up. And so, they were so ramshackled, and you got electric cables running all over the place. But
the big fire on the Walton set, after it was investigated, was a John Orr fire. He did start. They proved that he was on the lot. He was there when it was being extinguished, and that was a fire that I was literally.
Tell people who John Orr was.
John Orr was a Glendale fire captain or fire investigator who was an arsonist, and he went in and started the Walton set fire. I remember being a fireman there, and I got dehydrated and got carted out and taken to St. Joe's for smoke inhalation. But that destroyed the Walton set. Years later, like I said, they went back and looked at pictures, and they had John Orr there, and they put 2 and 2 together. He was on the lot, and that's who started that fire.
Do you remember when that was?
Oh, I could look. It's in his book. There's a couple of books that have it.
What years
back in the mid-'80s.
Okay.
But
what about some other fires? We got other fires in the past there too?
Well, they had in the 1930s, mid-30s, they had a major backlot fire. But the fires always seemed to be convenient because they always replaced them pretty quickly with new sets and new permanent buildings.
Well, that's funny because over at the ranch, the big fire, as some of us called it, there was a community fair going on that I remember being there. It was a 2-day event. They had opened it up to the public, and it was a Chamber of Commerce event. And they had rides and everything else, and a fire broke out 2 in the morning. It was finally determined. My best friend, Glenn Duke, who was an art investigator, was the investigator on that and found it was electrical short, that they were overloading from these Ferris wheels and all. But that fire destroyed a good part of the ranch. I remember one of the other fires at the ranch was the Western set. I live
High Noon Street.
I grew up on Toluca Park Drive, which is right on the backside. That's where that yield sign is on Pass. And I remember that fire. And LA City came in because it was...
Well, they had the biggest fires when Columbia was there.
Right.
See, when they had the whole block, right? Where the Save-On and the supermarket, that was all theirs.
That
It was the first to be sold off, that corner.
Yep. And it's fun. Living in this area of Warner Brothers, when we talk about it, I went from being a fireman. I went to work for Save On Drugs. I opened that store as an employee. Turned out I left there years later as a manager, but I remember that whole corner.
And then you had Alpha Beta.
That's right.
Then you had Lincoln Savings next to that.
That's right. Pizza Hut.
And then you had a jewelry store there.
Harlan Jewelers.
See, that's it. It's that area, like you say, that Columbia Ranch was well used because Columbia didn't have any room for a back lot in Hollywood.
Well, and I say to people today, with the development that's being done currently, I say to merchants and to people in Burbank, those people that are working on those stages during Christmas and they need a little this or a little that, they're going to run into Magnolia Park. They're going to go into that CVS, very convenient. I remember prior to the Starbucks that's there, I think it was a Del Taco. It was a couple of things. There was Carl's Jr. and Del Taco. That lot has been, they have a name for it. I forget. It's a studio type name. Yeah.
Yeah, it was very convenient. Like I told you, it's, and back then, a lot of the studio people lived in the neighborhood.
Well, exactly.
They weren't commuting to Palmdale and Santa Clarita. See?
Well, and they rode their bikes. That was the big thing. You on the lot.
And that's where Warner Brothers, and they started out, they had a bicycle.
We should also tell people who may not be listening to other parts of the country that the ranch is about a half a mile away from the Warner Brothers lot. Yeah. They're not next to each other. They're about a half mile distant.
But folks don't realize that the Warner Ranch was in Calabasas.
Yes.
It was
moved to close.
That was a 2,000-acre ranch. That's where Dodge City was shot, where Doris Day did movies there. The Juarez Sut was there. In fact, Paramount used it for Starlag 17. Harry Warner had his own private horse ranch where Woodland Hills is. That's what they call Warner Center, but it's got nothing to do with movie making. That was Harry Warner's property at Woodland Hills. But the Warner Ranch, Calabasas was wide open then. And across before the freeway was built, across from that you had Lasky Mesa. That was a vast wilderness area that was used in the charge of the Light Brigade.
Well, it's funny because I remember working at Save On Drugs, and I Register 1, which was on the East End, and this guy came up by the name of John Wayne. And he bought pack of cigarettes and something else, and I helped him, and that voice, and I'll never forget.
You tell him those cigarettes are going to kill him someday?
Well, that's what did kill him. But working there, Cecil B.
The radiation from Utah.
Well, Cecil B. DeMille, I remember when he brought pictures into the photo counter to be processed, and
yeah, but in fact, that happened all the time in places in Burbank.
Well, it still does. Just the other day, somebody was asking, where is now, you can see celebrities. They're all over. They're Priscilla's, Bob's. There's places downtown.
Well, it depends what you call a celebrity anymore. Now, they seem to be bigger on YouTube than they are on television. So that's not us. We're not the celebrities. So,
well, let's go back toward that, the water tower. Craig and I remember when Warner Boulevard was a through street.
Yeah.
And they had apartments.
Yeah, before they annexed it. The city of Burbank gave them all of Warner Boulevard.
Well, Paramount got the same from L.A. City when they annexed in where Western Costume was off of Melrose and the apartment building. That was all. See, they have the clout to do that.
Warner Boulevard used to go all the way from Clybourne straight all the way down to California Street.
See, that's right. See?
And there was also, besides...
you haven't even mentioned the NBC property.
Well, that's a whole different podcast, so...
Yeah.
Well, what about Warner Brother Records?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, look at the businesses that were on Olive, and the apartments that then Warner Brothers then annexed also, and our favorite little drugstore that was on...
Right on the corner?
Warner and Olive there. We used to get the greatest... First ever chocolate soda I ever had was right there.
And then you had Chatney's across the street from NBC.
Right.
So that was a famous restaurant.
Oh, a famous restaurant. You should listen to our restaurant show. We talk about them all and their history.
But Warner Brothers on that lot, if you're not in the industry and you look back, that's why we're kind of doing this podcast.
You get back to Irwin Allen. Irwin Allen left Fox because of the profits of the Tarrig Inferno. They shortchanged him. He came over to the Warner lot, the Burbank Studios, and he never had another hit again. He did The Swarm, he did TV movies, and they were never the same.
Well, it's funny that you say back in those days, the Burbank Studios, TBS. When I worked there, and in fact, when I left there, I still have my fire department badge that says the Burbank Studios, TBS.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a totally different, it was,
Well, that Irwin Allen building became the first Warner Brothers or the Burbank Studios tour building.
Right.
When he left the lot because of not getting any hits. That's it. It's a funny thing. Yeah, the studios are connected by different things.
Well, we've talked about a couple of different things. What about all the iconic things that were shot on that lot? Give us a rundown of some of the iconic movies. Well, over the years have been shot on that lot.
You can take the biggest sets like Camelot, when they built that massive castle set. Then that was readapted for Lost Horizon,
Okay.
which bombed. Camelot. In fact, most musicals in the 1960s bombed. The timing was off. You get a hit like The Sound of Music at Fox, and then Hello Dolly at Fox bombs because they're all coming out during Vietnam. Paramount, Darling Lily, Paint Your Wagon, tremendous flops. And Lost Horizon was a Ross Hunter picture. He gave Universal Airport a big hit. Saved them, but it was a flop.
Well, let's get back to our Warner Brothers movies, though.
Well,
I'm not too worried about Universal.
Well, in Hollywood, people using your sets, Kung Fu used the old Camelot set to do their show.
Most people don't realize when they do a show and they paint a backdrop or all the sets, they used to store those out.
Yeah, the scene dock. The scene dock was along Forest Lawn Drive. Have you seen that?
They would keep them for years, and again, if they redid a movie or had to do anything, or a director liked something that was in another show, they'd rent that backdrop and so forth. And it's kind of funny because years later, I happen to know a gentleman here in Burbank that owns quite a few of these rental places, public storage, but it wasn't called public storage. His number one client was the studios because he would call it, he used to rent air. They would put sets in there, the best paying client, and then those sets would be in there for years if the show wasn't being repeated.
And the studio forgot all about it, see? That they were paying for it.
Yep.
But I tell you what, though, I gave Craig a clip from Hooper, the Burt Reynolds picture, and that's another inside look at Warner Brothers stuff. And you see the scene doc of him driving through it and smashing up the car.
I love watching. I don't watch a lot of TV. I don't have time to. But when I do, and you see them walking down, Avenue D, and I recognize, New York Street. There's a commercial right now and there's snow on it. And I go, that's New York Street. They can change it so quickly. But it's just amazing.
What are some of the movies shot on New York Street? What are some of the historic?
Well, you got Midwest Street, where Bonnie and Clyde, one of the banks they hit.
Okay.
And that was also the street that they set up the parking meters for Cool Hand Luke. Now, they shot that on location, but for some reason, they didn't use that. They redid it on the lot with the parking meters. It was also where, the Music Man.
Okay.
Big use of that Midwestern street. And the Shootist, it was all reconfigured for John Wayne's The Shootist.
It's just funny, 1941, the first one, with the airplane. That was done. I worked that show. I got, so much overtime.
That was a Columbia Universal production.
Right. But they built a ramp for that airplane that was literally pulled by people to go up that ramp and crash. And it still gets me, blows me away. They painted that whole set. They brought in lighting. They brought in stuff. And then when the show wrapped, they brought in tens of those, about 10 of those big dumpsters.
That's right.
Dumpsters. And it all got trashed.
The studios always throw away a piece of wood if it's got a nail in it. They won't take the nail out. They throw the whole thing away. But I tell you, on 1941, they used the ballroom in Burbank. There was a ballroom located, and they used that for a ballroom in the picture.
They show the outside of it or just the inside?
I think just the inside.
Well, what's scary is if you look back at the original 1941, the graffiti all over the street scenes, the city bus that they used had graffiti. Today, I mean, did they, that was shot, 30 years ago?
Well, it's kind of like Blade Runner. Blade Runner is then
it was shot 40 odd years ago. It was a bomb. They couldn't give it away.
Yeah.
It was, like I say, Universal. We had all the miniatures. The Santa Monica wheel, that was all done on stage 12.
Well, and I don't think people realize the largest stage at Warner Brothers is people that work on the lot is stage 16.
Which used to be stage 7.
And they put two together, and it had you could take the stage floor out, and they could put a tank in there and fill it full of water and do boat scenes.
Yeah.
And they use that when you talk about miniatures. Yeah, we're giving TV secrets away.
No, that's the whole idea of the show. I had no idea about that.
When you see an airplane crash into a building, well, they're not going to go crash a building on Sunset Boulevard. They build a miniature, and it's all modified, and they do it on stage 16. I worked tons of hours. I remember falling asleep standing up on stage 16.
Well, I was there on the time machine.
Oh, there you go.
That's where they dug the floor out. They put a lagoon in there with a cave, and they couldn't give that movie away.
Which time machine movie was that?
This is the bad one, the one that was made in 2000. Okay. It's not the MGM.
There are a number of time machine movies.
I know, but the thing is, though, a lot of the guides sometimes say this was done for Busby Berkeley. No, that the stage was raised for Marion Davis, and William Randolph Hearst was he's the one who paid for it.
So people, when you come over Barham, and you see the largest building on that lot
with the logo on it,
exactly, that is stage 16.
So which is that now? Is that the one they used for the talk shows?
No, that's stage 5.
Stage 5.
Okay, right up front here.
Yeah. They used the Goonies was shot on it. Anything big.
Okay.
Poseidon was shot on it.
And then they changed the second floor. That's where security offices were. We're on the ground floor. Bank of America, they had a branch.
Right.
They were on the lot.
They were across the street.
Exactly, for that, your main branch. But
all gone.
What was funny is the second floor were production offices. And finally, who's the tall, redheaded talk show host?
Conan.
That's where his production offices were.
That's where he was for his TBS show, his late night show.
Yeah.
See, what complicates things is Warner's has changed the numbers on its stages several times, and it complicates the history.
It was 5, and now it's 16. Is that the only two numbers?
No, it was 7, and then it became
7.
But there were other stages that were changed.
Right.
See, it's funny how they lay it out that way, but Randolph Hearst had his own company, Cosmopolitan Pictures, and the Warner Brothers this guy's got big money, so we would let him do his own way, and he paid for the stage being raised, just because Marion Davis had to have the biggest stage in Hollywood,
Okay.
And Cain and Mabel with Clark Gable, he was on loan out from MGM. They made the first picture there, and Busby Berkeley just. He made his pictures there because it was there to use. But they didn't do it for him. Warner's weren't going to pay for their own.
No.
Pay for that. They had a sucker and a hearse to pay for it, and so that's how things are. And like I say, Marion Davis, I think she only made one picture after that and retired. But Warner's, when someone builds a good set on the back lot, it's going to stand up and be reused if they can.
Sure.
Well, a lot of people don't realize, back in the back parking lot, you come in off of Hollywood Way, you make a left, and right near the water tower, Clint Eastwood wanted to fly his helicopter into the studio. They built a helipad above ground, and then the residents that live along California Street got wind that there's a helipad on the back lot, and they said, no, we don't want, because they'll start using it as regular transportation. We don't want helicopters flying in and out of there at all hours. And the only person that could fly in to that was Clint Eastwood in his own helicopter. I only remember it being used once or twice. I was on the back lot when they landed plenty of helicopters. But it's funny because you look back, Friends uses a couple of streets out there. I recognize them,
But you know what? The show that people will recognize is the Walton's house set, right by the jungle. And they don't know right behind that house is a real street, right on top of it.
California Street.
It's just the facade. And, they just have a wire. The jungle used to be a little bit bigger than it is now. But that little jungle area was used in so many pictures.
Well, I recall.
And then you remember, which picture you remember it being used in?
I've seen them use it on TV, but never the use that it had on the Waltons and before that in movies. Movies used it all the time.
People don't realize the facade of the Waltons, and then they would have the full stage. They'd have a stage.
Right, they'd have the interior.
And they would do that. I remember, Craig, Fantasy Island. I remember they had their own stage when, Tattoo and Hervé and all that, the plane. Well, the plane was over at the ranch, but the facade of the...
Yeah, well, they built a replica of the Queen Anne cottage out at, from the Arboretum.
Right.
Yeah, L.A. Arboretum was their main, but even that got expensive to go over there, so they built a miniature one. Plus, they used stock footage.
Right.
See, they used their stock footage, and Warner's were king at doing that. I can tell you, getting back to what got me interested, when you used to watch Cheyenne or Maverick, they would have whole sequences taken from their Warner Brothers Westerns, and they just fit the actor, James Garner, whoever, and he just react to what the footage has already been done. But Warner's also had the original costumes, so they could literally wear the costume of the guy that they're matching in the shot. Plus, they had the props and the sets from the movies. This was a technique that made the Warner's TV shows look so impressive because, in fact, Raoul Walsh tried to sue Warner Brothers. He said, I shot the movie Colorado, and you're using whole scenes from that movie. But, of course, he didn't have a chance of winning,
Well, it's funny because where we talk about the jungle, it was also, there was Western Street back there and so forth. I still look at some pictures, and I recognize the Barham Hills over here, the
Right.
Hollywood Hills, as the backdrop.
And they got to be careful not to get the power lines. See, this is what... But you wouldn't notice that. The public wouldn't be seeing that. See, they didn't know what the configuration of the lot was. They're lucky that they never had any skyscrapers around.
Right.
See, and MGM was lucky with its back lot because they had the Baldwin Hills. See?
Well, and I don't think a lot of people realize how much has gotten filmed at Warner Brothers, but also how iconic it is. And to this day, they are, I'm told, they're backed up for rental space on different stages already. There's shows that will come out in 3-4 years that they've already rented stage space. So Warner Brothers isn't going anywhere. They just keep building.
Absolutely.
But you see, another reason for the stages is the fact they don't need the backlots. They can put up the blue screen, the green screen.
Well, I don't think
put a lot of stuff in there.
Well, I said to Craig last week, I was watching a Spectrum commercial done over at the ranch. I remember the ranch quite well. I worked it for many years, so I spent many hours there, right around the pool, and it was shot recently. Spectrum wasn't around, many years, tons of years ago, and I recognized those houses. It was, again, Leave It to Beaver, and
you made
Flying Nun.
You had the Bewitched house. You had
There was a Beaver at Universal.
yeah.
Oh, okay. Well,
Yeah, but
Flying Nun was at the ranch,
Right.
and so forth.
well, you remember when Lakeside Apartments was all part of the ranch.
I grew up, I ride my bike over those mounds of dirt.
That's it. See, when they put the Ventura Freeway through, that's another subject.
I think I told you when we had a pre-meeting, I was growing up back then, and come 5 o'clock, my mother used to tell me, go play on the freeway. I'd take my bike, and I'd drive down to the 134, ride my bike over, and I'd get on those big land movers like they were real. I remember 1962 is when they put in the 134, and Vaughn's, Gilbert's, Dana Drugs, I could tell all those shops. In fact, the secret that most people don't realize, and we could break it right here, you brought it up, Craig. When they designed the 134, it goes...
When they put the 134 extension in for the 101, Warner Brothers fought it. They said, you can't put a freeway that close to the studio or we're going to hear nothing but noise all the time from trucks and cars. So Caltrans and the state, they talked them into lowering the freeway between Pass Avenue and Buena Vista, basically, to underground so that the noise would not carry toward Warner Brothers. So if anybody wants to know why it goes low there and the bridges go over it there instead of under, it's because of the Warner Brothers influence.
They could have countered that argument with Paramount right in the heart of Hollywood, right off of Melrose Avenue.
Well, Warner had more.
Where Weston Street was 200 feet from Melrose, and that's where so many Westerns were shot. In fact, they had an entrance right by Paramount that came out by the Nicodale restaurant. So they would go there for lunch. They ride out. Literally, they had a hitching post by the restaurant. They come off the Bonanza set. And see, that's right in the heart of Hollywood.
Well, yeah, but now I think they were looking at the long term and traffic and everything.
Well, now you see,
they can influence it. They would. That's how they're thinking.
Well, funny enough, most films now are dubbed because you never get the perfect conditions.
No.
And dubbing, you get the pure sound.
Yeah.
Like I say, Universal had the same problem when they shot the Virginia next to the Hollywood freeway.
Well, let's bring that up. Let's talk about special effects that in the Warner Brothers used, and also things such as the Wilhelm scream.
Yeah, well, but most people wouldn't even know what the Wilhelm scream
I didn't know when we first brought it up. So tell us all.
But it's when an actor yells out. It's like when he's been shot or hit by an arrow. And obviously the studio doesn't want to have to go out and hire someone to do that each time. So they reuse. And the Wilhelm scream was first used by Warner Brothers. And I think it was an Gary Cooper picture that was supposed to be shot in Florida. And it was one of the people on patrol that gets shot. And he yells that out. In fact, it was Sheb Wooley, actor and country singer Sheb Wooley was the one that recorded the yell. And they've used it at least 200 times by different studios, even used in Star Wars. And in fact, the Academy Award-winning sound designer Ben Burtt, he did a mini documentary on the Wilhelm scream. If you Google it on the internet, you'll see the movies it's been in, And it's just a quick few seconds. But it's one of those trivial things that people, should notice.
What about other special effects that they've used over the years in the studios? I thought you said once that they didn't use squibs when they did shooting.
No, in fact, there's a famous photo. You can see that on YouTube of James Cagney ducking behind in Public Enemy. And they used a real marksman with a machine gun, a Thompson submachine gun, and he's firing into the corner of the building. But you see, Cagney gets plenty of time to duck. But after he saw it on screen, he said, I'm never going to risk that again. But the photo speaks for itself. Like
you said, they used a real gun, didn't they?
They used the real bullets. They didn't have squibs back then, see?
Well, some of the, I have been, in fact, whenever there was an open flame or gunfire or whatever, they had to have a fireman on set.
Yeah, I used gas jets.
And I worked on many, and I'll never forget, a couple of them got out of control.
That's it, the wind comes up.
Well, I did, effects guys are, so some effects guys will take it to the limit. And I'll never forget, I covered a Burbank Fire Department graduation at their training tower once. They called over to Warner Brothers, and they got one of the good, special pyros. And on the top of the Burbank tower, fire tower, graduating classes out there. Well, this guy hit the switch. He didn't tell everybody that he put 10 gallons of gasoline up there. Well, it put out a fireball. There's a school right across the street. The principal came over and said, "What the heck was that?" And some of the effects that are used now and used back in the day is just amazing.
Well, you look at Warner Brothers gunshots. It's very distinctive. Decades they use the same sound. And Fox uses a different sound for their guns. You could always tell. The Warner Brothers was always the most famous. It was almost the most...
We are totally ruining everybody that's going to go watch a movie.
I think if you're listening or watching this video, you're probably interested in this kind of stuff.
Well, we're talking about basic effects. Everything today is CGI'd in.
Right.
And so you don't have that kind of romantic part of how they did these things. A special effects guy, when he retires, he has what he calls, after decades in the business, he has a cookbook. And that book is precious. He'll sell that to a new guy, and he'll say, this is what you need to get so many ounces of this, to get this explosion. And that was a tradition passed on, from...
My son currently, he works on America's Got Talent, and they use a ton of pyro. And I visited, I'll tell you, they film in LA City or in Pasadena. There are tons of firemen around those special effects guys, because you got public, you got, actors and all that. And they are watched pretty close. It's, I know we've all watched the news about the Marlon Brando, or not Marlon Brando, but the movie that was done in accidental death that was Alex Baldwin. And, effects guys, it's funny. There's a pre-plan. And we've covered the effects guys that come up to Burbank about every 2 years. They go up to the landing pad, and they have 100 effects people, and they go over the rules and things, and they talk about, how to make it safe.
Well, that's it. You see, his production was shot on the cheap. He was breaking all the rules. See, and people were walking off the set that they wouldn't be associated with it. You hire good people, and they're professional, and they have a reputation to maintain. They're not going to go cheap.
Well, when you cut corners...
Well, it's like you don't have to put real bullets in the guns. If you're going to use a fake sound for the gun...
They said now you don't need to put anything in the gun, that they can have the flash and the sound.
That can be put on later.
Yeah, the guns can be completely inert.
And that's why people don't realize, I know there is a slew of people that are up in arms or were up in arms when they tore the ranch down But they don't realize now with CGI, with what you can do out of a computer, what you can do with your phone, your Samsung phone, but it's totally, they don't need the swimming pool. They don't need, they're going to put it on a green screen.
And that's why they had to make these new sound stages, because the other ones were so old.
Oh.
And then they have the electrical power and everything else, that now they're able to make these inside screens inside that make it look like the entire scenery of a shot, and the technology they have with the cameras.
Well, you look
follow that, and everything else.
When you look at an actor now, he's got ping pong balls all sewn into a latex thing,
right?
Because it's all going to be replaced
with a special effects costume or something.
That's right. So you bring in a name actor, then you cover his face up, and you put all this stuff on him. It could be anybody. In fact, the old-fashioned movies work because the effects look real. Today, the CGI is over the top. Way over the top. You think, I got to meet a guy called A.D. Flowers. He was the dean of special effects, man. He did The Towering Inferno. He did Tora Tora, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And he learned from the business, and he could think things out. Today, he wouldn't be employed, you see.
Well, let's go to the next version of what that is, and that'd be animation.
Yeah.
So what about the history of animation at Warner Brothers on the lot out there? I mean,
well, Warner Brothers,
Looney Tunes is out there now. Now DC Comics is located.
Well,
Warner.
That's it. DC Comics, when they brought them out from New York, they have their own buildings here, and they brought out tons of people. That I don't think a lot of people realize DC Comics is a big, big thing still.
Well, how about the old days of Looney Tunes, though? Bugs Bunny and all.
Well, Looney Tunes were basically made for adults.
Okay.
Looney Tunes.
Was that made at the Warner Brothers lot?
No, they were done at the Sunset lot.
Okay. That was the animation.
The original Termite Terrace. It was on the back of the property. Then they moved onto the lot at Waters in Burbank after they sold the Sunset to Paramount. And that's where KTLA started. But
when you say animation, in the city of Burbank, we have a ton of animation studios, and that's the big... I said to my granddaughters, we're watching some show they were watching the other day. The credits were 20 minutes, at least 300, 400, 500 people. And I said, people don't realize now what it takes.
Yeah, but a lot of that is subcontracted overseas.
Right.
See, Hanna-Barbera, used to be the king of animation.
Right.
Like I say, right by the Hollywood freeway.
But Ross's favorite line, yabba dabba do. He says it all the time.
This is it. It's Hanna-Barbera took over, when Bill Hanna and when they left MGM with the Tom and Jerry cartoons, they were forced into making them cheaper. And it never looked the same as the classic Academy Award-winning ones, But the animation now is all computerized. No one's doing anything with a pen.
It's funny. It's nice. I will say that the Nickelodeon being here in Burbank, they moved from Hollywood to Burbank here and have a big building across from Community Chevrolet. They've taken students from Burbank High and Burrage. And I happen to we've shot stories, we've done stories on these kids that go from high school to working at Nickelodeon, and now they are full-time animators working on shows. I mean, to see that, when Craig and I were in school, we were given a 60-millimeter camera, and that was the film days. But now, what the kids are graduating, and I will say Nickelodeon is a great partner in this city. They computers they give to the schools, and the relationship is fantastic. So
wow, there's some results for you. You say the magic word, and technology starts talking to you.
Wow.
Well, let's move on here, because the animation is not probably what really Warner Brothers is.
Well, Warner Brothers at its own. Warner Brothers had the animation that really entertained you.
Right.
Theirs was the inside jokes. With Bugs Bunny was probably the biggest grossing star for Warner Brothers when you think about it.
Okay.
Harry's been used and reused, and Mel Blanc is the man that did it. See, you don't have that today. I mean, you can computerize the voices and, like I say, the animation and the insider jokes, and you saw them making fun of Warner Brothers.
Don't tell it to Seth MacFarlane, because he would probably argue with you about that.
What's that?
Seth MacFarlane, about voices and about relevance today.
Yeah.
He does the Family Guy and the animation like that, and he does all the voices.
I don't think a lot of people realize some of these, like Seth MacFarlane, that's a big thing. Going into a studio.
Oh,
and I just heard the other day, I was watching a talk show, and they were talking, it is so different working on a set versus going into a studio and watching something on a screen, and then talking to it.
Yeah, they go in a t-shirt and shorts and then do their work instead of having to get on costume and everything else.
Right.
So before we wrap up here, any trivia about Warner Brothers that you think people would be interested to hear? Any trivia thoughts or anything else? Things that you hand out to you?
Well, you could talk about the betrayal of Jack Warner and Harry Warner when in 1956, when they all agreed to retire and sell their shares, and then Jack, who was leading the parade on that, he double crosses Harry and Albert and buys back his shares in league with a bank. And even though they got paid off very well, it was the betrayal, the fact that they were all going to retire. And Jack just wanted to become chairman. He wanted to have Harry Warner's job. And that gave him a stroke there. And I think a year or so later, Harry died. And his wife went to her, said it was Jack that really killed him. But a few weeks after that betrayal, Jack was vacationing in France. And then he has the big traffic accident there that puts him in the hospital for quite a while. And then when he comes back to the studio, they put up the big banner, "Welcome back, Jack." J.L. Warner, like Walt Disney, had a genius for using other people's genius. If it was another business, he was starved to death without the brothers. They handed it to him on a plate, the studio, and he had the best talent. But even they were double-crossed. Darryl Zanuck was the first to go. He was the man that gave them their biggest hits starting out, Rin Tin Tin, writing and producing those. And then Hal Wallace, who was the legendary producer at Warner's, he gave him Casablanca. And Hal left because everybody in Hollywood knew that Hal produced the movie Casablanca, but when the Academy Award, it was Jack Warner who jumped up to the stage first and accepted the Oscar and totally humiliated Hal Wallace. And then he goes over to Paramount and becomes a big producer there. But J.L. was always flamboyant. James Garner had a story when an actor or a producer would play up, they'd be invited or they'd be told to see Jack in his office. And to end an argument, he'd always point to the water tower and say, "Whose name's on the water tower?" That was his big, and that was true. I found out a lot about Warner's from Dick Mason. He started out at the mailroom at Warner Brothers, and it was Dick that was asked to start the tour during the Burbank studio period. They were looking for some money. They were so desperate for income.
And Universal was doing so well with their...
Well, that they could never compete with that. That
because most people don't realize, and again, you drive down Olive or make that turn at Hollywood Way and Olive, the tour office was that tiny.
It was $2. It was $2 for the tour. It was a couple hours. They had no advertising budget. It was all word of mouth. They might get some free advertising in the travel magazines. but it's slowly built up.
Well, now I remember many years ago before the tour office kind of when they decided to rebuild it, it's got its own parking structure, its own everything over there. The couch from Friends is on the lot now. But in Wonder Woman, the city bronze Wonder Woman is in front of the tour office where anybody, if you're in Burbank on Warner Boulevard, you don't need to go into the tour. You don't need to pay for the tour. You can go on the tour. But I've been told by one of our reporters, Ashley Erickson, she goes over there all the time, you can go in the gift shop and not buy.
Because you can buy, they make money out of your shop.
Well, but you don't have to be, you don't have to go on the tour, which is quite expensive.
But they closed their they closed their stores, didn't they? The Warner Brothers stores that were in the shopping mall.
In malls, yeah.
See, and Disney's is not doing good either. So, but yeah, it's the tour started off very small, and then it grew, and then Paramount started their tour. What people don't realize is that even though 20th Century Fox had a tour given by Gray Line Tours, and Gray Line was the one that started the Universal tour. It was Gray Line buses that would drive on the lot. The whole idea for Universal was to keep the commissary going. So they'd all they do a quick run around in the bus, and they'd end up at the commissary. Warner's took a different approach. They wanted to make it a more industrial tour, which is a real studio tour. Universal is basically a studio with a theme park with a studio attached.
It's funny you say that because when I worked there, back in the days, the tour, you were on a golf cart. There was a tour guide driving it, and you could only fit 3 people. Now they have these massive trams that go around. But back in the day, I remember when I was a fireman there, people would pay good money to go on the tour, but you got a real tour.
Yeah, you got whatever was going on that day.
Right.
But you weren't allowed to see the filming on a stage, obviously, but you'd see the stage door open.
Again, I don't think people realize those secrets. It's kind of like, NASA and so forth. People on shows, nowadays they write contracts that you can't say anything.
Non-disclosures.
But I remember working on shows, and people don't realize when they film on the street in Burbank, which I passed today, 2 film locations, most of the time they won't say what production it is.
No.
They don't want the people to know.
They used to advertise on the side of the trucks. They'd say Rockford Files, NBC.
Or a window placard.
Yeah, they'd have that.
One of my people here at the house worked on Star Trek, but because you say Star Trek, it's going to bring everybody, so they called it Royal Flush.
Mm-hmm.
So you worked on Royal Flush, you didn't work on Star Trek. So they just changed the name during production so that they know what it is, but the people on the outside, Royal, what's that? Oh, I don't know, some movie I don't know about it, And,
well, a quick flashback when you say that, working on, for many years, Warner's had their own development lab. I mean, where they, pictures.
Research. All the studios at their research department and archives.
But I mean, processing film and so forth.
Yeah, they you just
were able to buy what was called 5247, and what it was when they did a shoot with film, they would have extra 30 feet to 10 feet of leader, and they would sell that off for 10 cents, 20 cents. And there was a company here in Burbank and down on Highland that would process 5247, and you would get slides out of it, negatives, prints, all out of movie film. And you go buy a loader and load your own film. I remember saving tons of money.
I think that there was a camera store on Cahuenga in Hollywood. Mel
Pierce.
Yeah, he was there for the longest time.
Yeah. So, well, that, it's, when you think about
it, all these different things connect. If you've seen that, it happens all the time.
Well, we've talked here for, a good hour, and just amazing people that aren't in the industry or you go and you watch a movie or whatever and realize 90% of it is done in your backyard. You know, you drive by down Olive and you go, wow, all that was filmed right there. Kind of blows you away.
Absolutely. Well, I think this has been a great show. I think, people get a little understanding of what we have here in Burbank, and just one of our gems in Burbank. Of course, we have now the Burbank Studios, which was NBC. We have Disney here. We have Nickelodeon. We have major solid stages.
It gets complicated when you talk about the NBC, the Burbank.
Well, that's that.
That's why these things touch on each other. The history.
Sure.
So on.
And that's why we're here to kind of let people know this is what is going on. So we're going to be back and talk about NBC in the future, I think.
When you talk about that, Craig, the other day I'm driving up Hollywood Way next to that MGM Sphere,
right?
And everybody sees it on TV, or if you're in Vegas, all that production, all that R&D, research and development, is done right here in Burbank. That's what that facility is for.
Right.
They have square footage over on the old NBC lot, MGM Studios, and that was another studio that people, we dropped the names Warner Brothers and Nickelodeon and Disney. Now we got to add in there. And
see, what confuses people is that Warner Brothers, when they bought out, MGM, and they've got the biggest library, they got the RKO library. To the public, they think it's all been Warner Brothers all this time. See, they think Ben-Hur was made by Warner. You see, it's kind of complicated. It's so much. People only know about recent history of any studio.
And the sad part is that Warner Brothers doesn't make movies anymore. Basically, just distribution and rent.
That's all they are.
That's all they do. They don't make.
They make deals.
Yeah, they make deals there. So
it's funny you say that, because I after the studio, I was involved in something, and I was with an attorney, and he said, when you drive by the Circle Drive, those aren't studio executives. Those are all attorneys in there.
See? Plus the fact the executives have a revolving door. They're at Paramount one year, then they're at Warner's, and there's no continuity of leadership. See?
That's like free agency in sports.
This is why it takes decades to get a movie made. You get everything going with the executives, and then the minute you're about to start the picture, he's fired, and a new guy comes in, and he doesn't want anything that the old guy.
Well, that's what Paramount's going through right now. I guess Skydance bought Paramount, and now all the Paramount deals are up in the air, and now it's going to be a whole new studio there. So
this is it.
The more things change, the more they stay the same.
It's a rabbit hole.
Yes, it is.
Well, like you just said, down that rabbit hole, and we got to travel down that rabbit hole today.
Yes, we did.
And I'll tell you, Graham, your knowledge of you brought out with you, from England and so forth. It was a pleasure having you do this podcast with us.
Grateful to be here.
I think it's some of the background, and we're going to do other.
Yes,
we said
the rabbit hole actually is a very large hole.
It's become a black hole.
Well, and people don't realize this little community is the Burbank, 17.1 square miles, known as the media capital of the world.
Yeah.
And as we speak, Warner Brothers history is being remade already.
Every day.
This is it.
So anyhow, for Graham Hill, and of course for Ross Benson, Craig Sherwood saying thank you very much for listening, and please continue to support our channel, and we will talk to you next time.
Thank you for watching the latest My Burbank video. If you have it in your heart, please consider helping us by clicking on the super thanks down below, or even better, go to our channel and consider a membership. Your support is what keeps My Burbank going strong.